Hi everybody, my name is Levi and I'm with the Illinois State Library, and I was invited here to use 15 minutes of your class time today and 30 minutes of your class meeting next week to speak to you about the Illinois Digital Archives and the use of primary sources in your research. So today I am going to review primary sources with you. We are going to analyze primary sources, and we're going to learn about the Illinois Digital Archives and how to search the collection. In this course, you guys are learning about research methods and writing, and many of you are probably accustomed to using secondary sources such as articles, books, textbooks, and other things for your research assignments to back up your arguments or support any sort of thesis that you have. Primary sources are something else you can use, and I'd like to encourage you to use them today because they yield the opportunity for you to conduct original research, and for me the best part is just the excitement of touching history, of hands-on, coming in touch with the past through first-hand experiences. So, primary sources are materials that were created by those who participated in or witnessed events of the past. They can exist in written, oral, visual, and electronic formats. And they are documents that are original to a time and a place, but it's important to remember that they are also a subjective interpretation of a witness to an event or an activity in history. Today I'm going to lecture you, or lecture a couple of components, and we'll do a few exercises. And the first exercise that we're going to do is I'm going to show you a few images of documents and other items, and just tell me by show of hand, anybody, if it's a primary or secondary resource, okay? Based off of just these few things that we've discussed here. So this first item is a U.S. Treasury check in the amount of $7.2 million, and it was for the purchase of the state of Alaska. Take a look at it quickly and then let me know. What do you guys think it is, a primary or a secondary source? Yes, you in the yellow.
Primary.
That's right, primary. And one way that we can tell about this, or tell that it's primary, is just simply the condition of the item alone. You'll notice that there's a lot of browning to it, the script of the document. Also, there's a date stamp on here. You can't really see it, but it is there. At least in this image, you can't see it. So it is a primary source. The next item here is President Jefferson's message to Congress concerning the territory of Louisiana. Anybody? Yes, in the back?
Primary.
That's right, it's a primary source. A couple of ways that we can tell this is that it's handwritten. It's in a letter format. It's addressed to the Senate and the House of Representatives of the United States. And the most telling sign, well, two telling signs. The condition, first of all, it's browning, you have a bit of flaking on the edges, but most of all, you see the original signature of Thomas Jefferson and the date, January 16, 1806. The next item here is a journal article, and it's regarding prisoners of war among Civil War veterans. Nick?
Secondary.
That's right, it's a secondary source. And one way that we can tell is, even though it's original research, this is from a journal, and it also includes footnotes here that reference other researchers' work. The last item is an oral history of a World War II veteran who survived the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Does anybody know? Is this a primary or secondary source? Corral?
Primary.
That's right, it's primary. Even though it's an audio recording, it is still the veteran's experience of living through the bombing of Pearl Harbor. So you can use primary sources in your research for any of your assignments. And research in primary sources is performed in all disciplines and not only in history. Your general research begins with a problem or thesis that must be proved or disproved. A researcher wants to observe, reflect, and question the items on hand. And an archives can serve as a sort of laboratory for the researcher to experiment with any hypotheses, conjectures, and it can also allow them to test theses with historical artifacts. When working with primary and secondary sources, a researcher wants to employ critical thinking skills as they observe and process their observations or the findings of another researcher. And when using primary sources, this can be done with a thoughtful analysis and interpretation of the item on hand. There are a few guidelines and areas of criteria that I'm going to give to you to aid in your research of primary documents or sources. These are just a few things to consider when you're working with primary sources. First thing is the verification of facts and the credibility of claims within that document, the reliability of the source that created that document or experienced the event, the detection and determination of a bias both in the source of the information and in oneself, you the researcher. So do you have a bias towards what you're reading? Do you have a filter that all of this is going through, your observations? One thing you would want to consider is identifying any unstated assumptions that are presented with the item or the document. Distinguishing between unwarranted and warranted claims that are made by the object or within the document. And lastly, determining the strength of an argument that's presented with an object or with the history that's recorded. Two components of analysis that researchers, regardless of whether they're primary or secondary, use are external criticisms and internal criticisms. And these are really great things to use when you are handling or working with primary sources. These internal and external criticisms are mostly questions that you would ask yourself as you read and observe these objects. External criticism is really defined as the process of verification and authentication of evidence. This can often be considered as the who, what, where, when, and why of the object that you have on hand. And some of the questions that you can ask are, where was the document written? When was the document written? Why was the document written? Who wrote the document? You can also apply that to things that aren't written, objects as well. Why was the object created? Why is it here? Why has it lived to now? And why am I looking at it? Some internal criticism questions. Well, internal criticism is the process of reading and interpreting the contents of the primary source. So it's not just the specifics that are obvious with the item, but it's what you are interpreting the item to mean. These questions that fit internal criticism are, what is the real and literal meaning of the document or the object? Can you detect any bias or prejudice that calls into question the author's argument? Can you ascertain the truth of the author's conclusions? And do you need more information in corroborating testimony to understand the document? To me, that final question is one of the most important parts, because not every object that you handle is going to be specific. You'll need to consult other things to really confirm what's being presented with that object or document that is a primary source. So keeping in mind these questions, these analysis questions of external criticism and internal criticism, we're going to do a brief exercise. And I'm going to hand out to each of you a replica of a letter written by Secretary of War Henry Stimson to President Harry S. Truman